All right, so the wait is over. For the benefit of the viewers who are just joining in, let me recap for you what has been the key recommendations, the top 5 recommendations of the Arvind Subramanian panel. The report has recommended an R&R range of between 15 to 15.5%. Remember, CNBC TV18 is the only channel to have gotten it right. We said it's likely to be lower than 18%. The report has also recommended a lower rate of 12%. The standard rate will depend upon the choices made by policymakers on account of exemptions, tax categorization of products, etc. The standard rate for goods and services is in the range of 17 to 18%. The report has also recommended a demerit rate of 40%, and the chief economic advisor clarifying there that the demerit rate could on tobacco, luxury cars, pan masala, aerated products, etc. Let's bring in our panel of high-powered experts who've been listening into us. Sachin Menon of KPMG, MS Money of Deloitte, Haskins & Sells, Satish S of PwC, Amit Kumar Sarkar of Grant Thornton, and Malini Mallikarjun of BMR Advisors with us here on CNBC TV18. Well, let me start by getting your quick reactions, Mani. First, what do you make of it? 15 to 15.5, a positive surprise, just as I told you to expect.
Yeah, it is definitely a very, very welcome surprise for everyone. And I would just say that we should not read too much into the 15.5%, because what he mentioned is that the standard rate would be between 17 and 18. And that is the rate at which most goods are likely to be taxed. It does seem unlikely that any goods will be taxed at 15 and 15.5, or even services would be taxed at that rate. So while 15.5 is certainly welcome, it's more like an economic mean and not necessarily the rate at which certain goods or certain services would be taxed. As
so that
he
means
said,
you're
I
saying
guess
that we should go with the standard rate, which is the 17 to 18% range.
That's right. As he said, that majority of the goods would be taxed at 17 or 18%. Similarly, in case of services, except if those are under...
We've got Jayant Sinha speaking to us. Let's just listen in.
Parameters and these numbers, and I think that forms a very good basis for further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, we'll get back the Minister of State for Finance in just a second. But sorry, Mani, I interrupted you. Take me through what you were saying, because as you pointed out, and as the CA himself pointed out, the standard rate is what is going to be applicable across a majority of the tax base, which works out to between 17 to 18%.
Yeah, and that is also keeping in line with what was largely expected, that the rate which would apply to the majority of goods and services would be between around 18% or so. So if we have a rate which is between 17 and 18%, as I mentioned some time back, I guess trade and industry would be very happy about it. This would necessarily mean that in respect of service providers, there is a bit of an increase. But at a broad level, since they will benefit by getting more credits, I guess they should also be pretty happy about it.
Okay. Sachin, let me get your reactions in now on this, and let me start by asking you first about the revenue neutral rate and the standard rate as well.
Well, end of the day, this is a pleasant surprise from the Chief Economic Advisor. But as he said, this 15% to 18% range is dependent upon so many ifs and buts. He's talking about a range of 2% to 6% on the precious metal and the rate, whether it is 15.5 or is it going to be 18%, is largely depending upon whether we are fixing a rate of 2% or 6% on the gem and jewelry and precious metal segment. And as also, he envisages that many of the, almost all of them, except he said 90 whatever, exemptions are moving out, and as a result, you will have more taxes coming in, and with that all condition, we may having a range of 15 to 18%. And to me, 18% looks more realistic compared to the situation around. And we may have to wait and see that how the political establishment accepting this recommendation, because they made a suggestion. So GST Council need to, or the Empowered Committee need to endorse this recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The Empowered Committee will need to endorse this. But Amit, let me get your comments in, not just on the revenue neutral rate and the standard rate, but also the demerit rate, which has been pegged at 40%. And the CEA saying that the demerit rate could be applied on tobacco, on luxury cars, on pan masala and aerated drinks. So on all three, the standard rate, the revenue neutral rate, as well as the demerit rate.
So this was kind of expected that there would need to be some revenue buoyancy in the recommendations of the CEA and the groups of products that they're talking about. And I carefully noted what the Chief Economic Advisor did mention. He said that he's keeping the list of goods in the demerit category at the bare minimum. And I personally like the options that he has considered because they would create the revenue buoyancy. These are aspirational products. I don't know whether you consider pan masala to be aspirational, but let's go with that as a premise. And this will create that buffer for allowing some of those exemptions which the political establishment may insist to go through. Taking off with what Sachin was saying, and I completely agree with what he was saying right now, I think the bigger key is not so much as precious metals, but also much more importantly, just how many of the groups of exemptions that the central government currently provides to the industry would they be willing to let go of. In a discussion with the states, one thought point that used to always come out in technical deliberations is this requirement of having a common list of goods where the center and the states can finally agree. If that recommendation is going to be, a consensus-driven recommendation which comes to as close as possible to the recommendations, then that is the best, way forward, really. The way I see it, 18% is very borderline based upon those assumptions, and there are lots of ifs and buts, still around. We're still not out of the woods.
No, we're still not out of the woods, and these are only recommendations at this point in time. These will have to be cleared by the empowered panel before they get to Parliament, and of course we will need to get in reactions from the Congress party as well. But very quickly, Malini, let me ask you to comment on what we've seen as far as the interstate 1% tax being done away with. That is a recommendation that's been made by the CEA panel. And he also very categorically stated that while it's not part of their terms of reference, he does believe that it would be wrong to actually enshrine the rate into the Constitutional Amendment Bill. So both those demands of the Congress party, the CEA panel recommending against those.
Well, I guess he's recommended against one and for the other, because one of the Congress party's long-standing demand has been the removal of the 1% tax on interstate transactions, and to that extent he's agreed with that. Frankly, I think it's a very good recommendation, because in all of the things that we're talking about in GST as is currently envisaged, if there is one complete outlier, it is the 1% tax. So the fact that the CEA panel is recommended for the removal of that, I think is a wonderful thing. It will be met with a great amount of satisfaction by the industry. As regards, sorry, Shireen, your other question was?
Yeah, the not enshrining the rate in the bill, which is of course what the Congress has been demanding, but we don't believe that is an area where government is going to cede ground, even though the Congress believes that is non-negotiable.
Yeah, well, in all honesty, I think enshrining that in the Constitution Amendment Bill is a tall order, because like we've heard and spoken about, amending that thereafter will become a tough challenge. So to not enshrining...
Just hang in there for 1 second, please. We've got the Minister of State for Finance. Let's just listen into him and then we'll continue our conversation.
Corporate India has been asking CNBC TV18, how does one determine that the three rates, what goes into which slab?
That's precisely what the GST Council has to do, and that's precisely what is intended for the GST bill, and which is why we have been maintaining that the constitutional amendment has a very important role to play at a constitutional level, which is to be able to set up the structure that enables us to be able to design these different structures and then assess dynamically and iteratively over time which products and services go where. That is really what the work of the GST Council and that is what has to be reflected in the GST bill. I have said all along that the first act in this play, if you will, is to actually get the constitutional amendment passed. Right. That in itself is quite complicated legislatively. Thereafter, working through the rate structure, working through which products and services go where, is also legislatively quite complicated, because we have to go through a consultation exercise, we have to formulate the GST bill, and then have that discussed, debated in Parliament, and then passed.
My last question, sir, is it practical to put a rate within the Constitution? Because experts tell us that no rates have still not been put in the Constitution?
I think there's a very good reason why there are no rates in the Constitution, and around the world that is in fact the practice, because the Constitution is a framework document, it's a principles document. It does not go into day-to-day policy making. There is a role for a framework and a constitutional architecture, and that's reflected in the Constitution. And then there's a role for a bill in Parliament that deals with the day-to-day aspects of policy making and rate setting. And that is the architecture that has evolved in our Constitution, which is an extraordinary document, and that is in fact the practice around the world. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, sir.
Well, that's the Minister of State for Finance, Jayant Sinha, there talking about the GST recommendations made by the CA panel. We will need to check in with the Congress party. I believe we do have Manish Tiwari, spokesperson of the We'll get to him in just a second. But let me get back to our guest now. Malini, sorry I rudely interrupted you to listen into what the Minister of State for Finance had to say. On balance now, he's talking about doing away with the exemption Raj, which is the stated objective of this government. The CBDT has already put out that proposed roadmap. And a lot of what will finally happen as far as the rate structure is concerned will depend on, as he said, political choices and policy choices that this government decides to make.
Absolutely, Shireen. And I'm glad you interrupted me, because I guess in the scheme of things, it's more important to hear what Mr. Sinha has to say. But coming back to the question that you raised, really, I think we need to view this panel in the right context. Really what it is just another step in the movement towards implementation of GST. He has made the recommendation. There is a lot of economic analysis, I'm sure, to back it up. But really, like he said, what needs to now happen is the Constitution to get amended. And I suppose this is another way of nudging all the political parties into making that happen.
Well, since you talk about political parties, Malini, we do now have the political parties joining us. Pawan Verma of the Janata Dal United joins us. Mr. Verma, appreciate you joining us. I understand that your party is hoping that the winter session will actually be a productive one and the GST bill will go through. I understand that there have been meetings between senior BJP leaders as well as the Chief Minister Nitish Kumar to ensure the passage of the bill in the winter session itself. What do you make of the recommendations of the Subramanian Committee? Standard rate of 17 to 18% is what they're recommending, and a revenue neutral rate of between 15 to 15.5%.
No, first of all, let me clarify. We would like it to be passed. We, in fact, are concerned about its unnecessary delay earlier when the UPA was in power because of opposition by the BJP. Now we would like it to be passed, but that must be preceded by structured, sustained engagement with the opposition on the 2 or 6 points. I think that what the 17
Mr. Verma, I think we've got you on a bad line, so I'm going to try and reconnect with you. But let me bring in Manish Tiwari of the Congress Party. Mr. Tiwari, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. I want to get your reaction. It looks like, at least on the big demand of a low rate, the government has given ground. And that seems to be the recommendation of the CA panel. 15.5% is the revenue neutral rate, and the standard rate is between 17 to 18%. But the chief economic advisor has also said he doesn't agree with the need for the rate to be enshrined into the constitutional bill. On the other hand, they have recommended doing away with the 1% interstate tax, which is what the Congress party was recommending as well.
Well, these are recommendations at the moment. You see, the government has to apply themselves to the recommendations and then decide as to whether it accepts the recommendations or not. Because ultimately, the chief economic advisor, in his best judgment, or the panel that he was heading, has come to a certain conclusion. And those conclusions have then been encapsulated into recommendations. Now, the government has to come forth and first say whether it accepts those recommendations, what part of the recommendations does it accept, what is it that it disagrees with, and then only can someone respond to it. You cannot have people responding to recommendations.
No, I understand that, Mr. Tiwari, but what we are given to understand is that these recommendations do have the blessings of the Finance Ministry and the Finance Minister. So let me ask you this. If these recommendations are accepted by the government and taken forward, what would the Congress Party's objections then be?
Well, one thing that we learn in this business is never to respond to a hypothetical question, Shri. ultimately, let the government make it stand clear. Let them walk the talk. Let them act on these recommendations. Let them say what part of it they are accepting, what part of it they are not accepting. And obviously, insofar as enshrining the rate in the Constitution is concerned, that remains non-negotiable. I was hearing one of your earlier panelists saying that if you do enshrine it through a constitutional amendment, then it will become unamendable. That's the entire objective, that you do not have the finance minister or the finance ministry at his women fancy gerrymandering with the rate every now and then or every year. Though there is no equity to tax.
The government's argument has been that what happens in the case of any exigency and you need to actually amend the rate, if at all you will need to amend it, and then you have to go through the cumbersome process of going to Parliament and getting two-thirds majority in both houses. That's been the government's argument on why they believe it's not practical to enshrine the rate. But you're saying that that is non-negotiable.
That is insulting the wisdom of Parliament. If you actually do have an exigency, then you cannot have a situation whereby other people would be blind to that exigency. But if the exigency stems from your mismanagement of the economy, your profligacy, and then you want to fill up your coffers by amending the rate up, then obviously there's a problem there. And that's why the two-third bar becomes all the more necessary when your objective is to create a common market. So therefore, we would cross the bridge when we come to it. First of all, let the government formally come up and say as to what part of the recommendations are acceptable, what part are not acceptable, and then, there would be a structured response to it.
Okay, Mr. Tiwari, may I ask you if that internal meeting that your party president had said would be held within the Congress party after the meeting with the Prime Minister, when can we expect a meeting within the Congress party to take cognizance of the recommendations of the CEA panel and to take forward the conversation that they had with the Prime Minister?
Well, first of all, there has to be an internal meeting of the government itself. See, the recommendations cannot be deliberated upon. It is the decision of the government which will be deliberated upon. Ultimately, the recommendations of the CEA have to crystallize into a decision of the government, and that is then which would be pondered upon. So therefore, let's not put the cart before the horse. Let the government first make up its mind, and then we'll cross the bridge when we come to it.
But are you at least satisfied with the fact that the rate is between 17 to 18%, which was what the Congress party was demanding, and also the 1% tax at least has been recommended to. I know it's a recommendation,
At the end of the day, it's only a recommendation. Let the government apply itself to the recommendation, and then let them formally take a stand on it.
Okay, Manish Tiwari, appreciate you joining us here. That's the Congress party view. Let's very quickly bring in a quick reaction from Pavan Verma at the JDU. Mr. Verma, Manish Tiwari there of the Congress party saying that these are recommendations. We will first have to hear from the government, take the official line on whether they accept this or not. But very clearly also stating that not enshrining the rate in the bill is non-negotiable. They will not yield on that. Are you expected, is your party expected to lean on your friends in the Congress to ensure that they give up some of those objections?
I'll tell you something. The government, on the basis of the report, must come out with a negotiating strategy. It must put forward its arguments in favor of what it believes needs to stay, and also be flexible in order to accommodate what was the property actually of the UPA government when initially introduced. Now, I'll tell you my reaction. My party supports the GST bill. We believe the 1% entry tax needs to go. We believe that was an imposition actually by the current Prime Minister in his avatar as the Chief Minister of Gujarat in order to delay or derail the GST bill.
Right.
So I believe the government would be agreeable to it. Now, on the question of the 18%, the global average GST rate is around 18%. Whether you put the cap in the constitutional amendment or the GST bill is a matter of negotiation. It's a matter of assuring consumers and customers that there will not be a great fluctuation in the rates. There's an iron-cast assurance to them that there would be, it would be, in a sense, having a cap. That's easily resolved. The third point is about a redressal mechanism. I think this is the most easily resolved, whether it's done through the GST Council or whether you have the GST Council itself in a situation where they can't come to a solution, recommending a panel of experts, much like arbitrators, or as a judge, a judicial intervention. These are easily resolved matters. So I think we are very close to it. My real problem is that in the ruling party today, there are enough people who, outside the ambit of anything of constructive value, will make statements which will outrage the nation and naturally also outrage Parliament, thereby derailing or disrupting proceedings. So, the government must negotiate constructively, and secondly, let's have a peaceful Parliament.
Absolutely. We're hoping that that indeed is the case. But Mr. Verma, appreciate you joining us here. That's the reaction coming in from the JDU. And the reason we spoke with the JDU is because we're given to understand that senior BJP leaders met with the Chief Minister of Bihar, Nitish Kumar, and they're trying to lean on him to ensure the passage of the bill in the session of Parliament. But let's get back to our tax experts now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for patiently standing by as we try and get in as many political reactions, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a legislative process, and we need to be able to clear those obstacles and those hurdles before any of this can actually be a reality. Sachin, let me ask you, in terms of what you heard from the Chief Economic Advisor, in terms of the rate structure, the approach that the CA panel has followed, what were the highlights and what were your key concerns?
I think Sachin has dropped off. This is Satish. Can I respond to that?
Yes, Satish, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my real concerns are, I still feel a few things have not been really addressed. What I would actually prefer is a kind of a consistency in the rate structure over a period of, say, next 5 years. See, when I look at, for example, something like a foreign trade policy, I have some kind of consistency over a period of 5 years. So as an industry, I would actually ask for a consistency over, say, whatever period of time. It could be a 3 or 5 year period. In addition, the kind of issues which have not been addressed is what happens is if I were to put up a special economic zone, then what happens to those kind of exemptions? Is it going to be an exemption or is it going to be a refund? Some of these things require actually a little bit of further clarification. The third angle where I would need a clarification is what happens to those low-end assessees, the threshold assessees in particular. So ideally the industry would want to know what is the threshold limit and what could be the composition rates, if at all applicable, for those kind of assessees. But of course, given the fact that the rate structure is about 17 to 18% is certainly a positive. At the same time, it's going to be common for goods and services without any abatements, and that's certainly a positive. But at the same time, we need to live with the fact that there are going to be a few statutes which are going to be outside the ambit of GST. For example, real estate. Some of the mining taxes, some of the rubber cesses, electricity duty, some of these are going to ultimately push up our tax costs in the business. So it's not that just we are looking at about 17 to 18% peak rate.
That's right.
So we need to look at the entire overall gamut of tax and then look at it from an industry perspective as to what exactly is the tax bill for the organization.
Amit, would you agree with that? And, also that, the tendency to get carried away with what the headline number suggests, but the devil lies in the detail, as we were just pointing out.
Well, the devil always lies in the detail when it comes to indirect taxes. The way I see, these recommendations, and they are obviously just recommendations, I would like to reiterate what I mentioned earlier. At the end of the day, the line item that I'm most concerned about is the standard rate, and there are very key assumptions that have been put forward to arrive at the standard rate. It's between 17 to 18%. I will go with what the Chief Economic Advisor himself was explaining. I'm guessing from a political, logical perspective, and I'm sticking my neck out and making this comment, most likely precious metals may be in the 2% to 4% bracket. If you're having a lower rate of tax on precious metals, then you would probably land up having a slightly higher standard rate. So therefore 18% is what we will probably have as a takeaway immediately. When we are looking at the lower rate for goods,
so let me just take you through that,
Amit,
at
a higher rate,
since you talk. Since you talked about precious metals, and I have the benefit of looking at the table that's come in from the government. The rate on precious metals, 6, 4 and 2, and the alternative rate that they've suggested is so at 15% it's 6, 4 and 2, and at 15.5 it's 6, 4 and 2 as well.
So when we're looking at that, if you and I'm just focusing on precious metals as maybe a dipstick review of the assumptions made. Logically, as I was saying, it would be very appropriate if precious metals go at 2%. It will be part of the broader consensus, and the rates at which the state governments are habitually taxing precious metals. Let's leave Kerala out for a moment. If that be the case, then you're looking at a standard rate, assuming an RNR of 15.5 of 18%. Now that 18% will have to face the test of all the exemptions, which are mostly at the door of the central government, and they will have to rationalize it. So far, whatever views have been coming, the central government would probably have to bite the bullet there. That is something for the Union Finance Minister to consider. When you're looking at some of the situation or area-based incentives like special economic zones and things like that, those are big components of what the Chief Economic Advisor was talking as revenue foregone. And it will be interesting to see whether they will continue to give the exemption status to special economic zones or whether they will go down the refund route. Whichever way you look at it, the broader perspective, and the comment also had come from the Chief Economic Advisor when he was giving his presentation. Whatever exemptions, whatever alternatives to exemptions the policymakers may consider, it is sacrosanct not to break the value-added chain. If the value-added chain breaks, then our expectation and our positive surprise looking at the revenue-neutral rate calculation and the standard rate offered will also probably go down.
Right. In fact, I'm just looking at what they've actually had to say and what he's cautioning against. And he says that if you continue to enjoy highly concessional rates across several categories, then the rest of the economy will have to pay in the form of higher rates on other goods, including essential ones. And so that's a cautionary note there coming in from the Chief Economic Advisor in the report that he has presented. But Mani, again, to you, what would be the red flags as far as you're concerned?
I would say that the red flag as far as I'm concerned would be the fact that we should be having very few exemptions. The Chief Economic Advisor mentioned that the basis on which the revenue neutral rate has been calculated has considered approximately 90 exemptions. He also mentioned that there would be a review of some of the exemptions relating to education and healthcare. Now, if we are going to have 90 odd exemptions, and we are not going to get rid of most of the exemptions, then to my mind it's going to become very, very difficult to administer GST because bear in mind, unlike the present system where the exemptions in respect of the central taxes such as service tax and excise are common all across the country, in GST we are going to have GST exemptions which are going to be different across states, which is again going to lead to issues in terms of interstate movement of goods. So if the price of a product is lower in a particular state, by experience we know that there is a large amount of movement of those goods to that particular state. So I would say at a broad level that there is a need to relook at what exemptions we need and keep them to the bare minimum. It could be a very low number. Together with this, I think what is very welcome in terms of what the Chief Economic Advisor mentioned, he did say that there would be no abatements, which again is a welcome sign because an abatement is a form of indirectly exempting a value of the goods. So if we keep the exemptions low, I'm sure we are headed towards a good GST.
Yeah, and he spent a fair degree of his time talking about the need to do away with exemptions in the report. But Malini, let me ask you to point out what you would see as the problem areas and what would be your sort of red flags at this point in time.
Sure. So, I actually think the red flags are not what is talked about today at all by the CEA, because what he basically did is highlighted some key components. Clearly, all of that were in the realm of the expected and the positive, mostly. I think what we now need to look at is really how the rates get aligned across the state. So it's one thing to say that the rate will be 18%, but how are the goods going to get classified? Because if history were to be anything to go by, then oftentimes the states don't align the way they classify the products. So I think the next thing to be done is really to look at the classification of the goods and ensure that all of the states follow the same method of classification. That's one. The other thing that I would say is really on the removal of the exemption for education and healthcare, which is again something that the CEA recommended. While that's a good thing because the exemptions should go down, I would say that these are the sectors that the exemption should go away the last, because at the end of it, it is a basic necessity in our country today still. Especially if you have exemptions for over 90 products, and that's a fairly long list. I would say it's better to prune that list before we get down to the essentials like healthcare and education. So just from the big ticket items that you talked about, really those are the only key things I can point out as red flags. But really, Shireen, I think the way to look at today's development as just another nudge in the right direction, and no doubt a positive one, no doubt a much needed one. And I think it's also a sign being sent by the government about its intent and desire. And just for that, I think it's something that we all need to be happy about. From here on, it is the fine print that will evolve, and much of that will take time. And I think the red flags will all come out at that point in time.
You know, I couldn't have crafted that headline any better, Malini. It's a nudge in the right direction. So thank you very much for actually providing us with one of the key headlines for this evening. But let me start by getting wrap-up comments from each of you, because you've been here with us on CNBC TV18 pretty much through the evening, taking us through what you expect from here on. And, you know, there's many bridges that need to be crossed. Of course, the political one is a big one at this point in time. And you heard the Congress party money. It seems like, you know, enshrining the rate in the bill at this point in time is non-negotiable. So we don't know what that means exactly, whether that means that there is room for negotiation or the door is shut at this point. But, you know, what's your sense? What does your gut tell you? Do you believe that we are likely to see Congress come on board?
I would say at a broad level that we need to wait and watch and maybe not speculate too much in terms of what people say, because as we have seen earlier, most of the people are now coming around and becoming realistic on GST. And I would say that over the last 2 weeks or so, we have seen a lot of good sense prevailing in respect of GST. Now, I would also like to point out two specific things which the Chief Economic Advisor mentioned, which was very welcome to hear, and I just noted it down. One of the things that he mentioned, and this is something which is very welcome if it is acted upon, he did say that we need to avoid rate bands, we need to have one rate, and there is no need for an additional autonomy on rates. Now, this is something which is very welcome, because in the past when we have seen that there is a flexibility given on rates, it leads to some of the players tweaking the rates needlessly, and that again leads to problems in respect of uniformity of rates. The other point which he mentioned, which again is very welcome, is he did say that alcohol, petroleum and electricity would be required to be included under the ambit of GST, possibly at a later point of time.
Yeah, he hopes that will happen, Mani.
That's right. That's right. So petroleum is already included in the GST bill. Alcohol is not included in the Constitution Amendment Bill as of now. So possibly if even petroleum products are included much sooner than the 2 year that is envisaged in the bill, that would be a welcome relief for trade and industry.
Okay, and over to you, Satish, for your wrap-up comments, the highlights for you, the big takeaways from this evening's 45-minute conversation with the Chief Economic Advisor and his recommendations.
I would say overall it's been a positive recommendation coming from the CEA today, which effectively means that yes, we are going in the right direction as far as GST rollout is concerned in the country. But I would like to point out that the classification that we have today is not only for goods, we also need classification for services. Assuming the rate of tax is going to be different for services, say at a 12% and a band of 17-18%. We don't have that today because it's a uniform rate for services, which effectively means that we have to have a robust classification even for services. Otherwise, I think it can be a disaster. And what happens is when it comes to certain complex transactions like a works contract or an AMC contract, there will be a combination of goods and services. So ideally they should be grouped in the same rate rather than partly into a 12 and partly into a 17 or an 18%. Because there again that will result in a kind of confusion for the industry and possibly litigations. So these are a couple of further takeaways which I have at the end of the announcement by CEA. But of course we need to look at the fine print to really try and understand the real implications for the industry. In any case, it is only a recommendatory thing today.
Absolutely, and what we have today is only the executive summary. I would imagine that the final report, which is going to be put out on Monday, will give us some more color and some more of the details. Amit, final words from you. We just heard Satish talking about the need for classification of services as well, and otherwise that would lead to a disaster. In terms of what future action you would like to see and the kind of detailing that you would expect, what is it that you would look forward to?
Well, majority of all the points that I was thinking about, my other panelists have already mentioned that, and quite wonderfully. I'll probably summarize my comments by looking at the takeaways from today. First takeaway, we have a recommendation coming from within the government itself that, forget the rumors, the revenue neutral rate with all the assumptions is 15 to 15.5, leading to a standard rate of 17 to 18, which is good. They are looking at a demerit rate, which was not, entirely, expected, which is also fair enough. We can absorb that as an economy. We are looking at a situation where all services is recommended to be taxed at the same rate, which is also fine. It would have been nice to have, a bunch of services taxed at a lower rate, giving it the same status as goods of national importance, where the exemptions or the lower rate of goods are currently bundled up at 12%. The assumptions are the key, and going forward, those assumptions will be where a lot of discussion and debate will happen. Those assumptions will form the premise for us to read the fine print. Those assumptions is what will be tracked by all the observers on GST vis-a-vis the government, and the assumptions are mainly assumptions of whether the central government will bite the bullet and bring down the list of 250 to 60 plus exemptions on goods at the same level as that of the states. So those are my takeaways, as I see right now.
All right, Amit, hang in there. Kevin Disa, long-time veteran at Bajaj Auto, also joins in to bring us a corporate reaction. Mr. Disa, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. The recommendation is of a revenue-neutral rate of 15 to 15.5%, but the standard rate, which is likely to be applicable across most categories, will be between 17 to 18%. The panel has also recommended doing away with the controversial 1% interstate tax. There is a demerit rate of 40%. Luxury cars in that bracket. We don't know about luxury bikes. Your reaction, sir?
I think it's extremely positive. In fact, if you look at it a few months back, people were talking about a rate of about 20 to 24%. 17.5% and 18% is extremely welcome. And the doing away with the 1% of the CST or the interstate sales tax is also extremely welcome. So I think it's extremely positive for the auto industry.
Well, this is a recommendation at this point in time. We will need to see when it is incorporated or taken forward by the government and when that bill goes through Parliament itself. But Mr. Disa, thanks very much for joining us with a quick reaction to the news that's coming in this evening. We've also got reactions coming in from key officials of the Finance Ministry, the former Revenue Secretary and now the Secretary of Economic Affairs, Shaktikanta Das, also going to be on CNBC TV18 in just a second. But let me take this opportunity to thank our guests, Malini, Satish, Amit, and Mani. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. I know it's been a long evening for you as well, but thank you very much for your patience and for helping us decode the recommendations of the CA panel. Appreciate your time here on CNBC TV18. We haven't taken a break in a long time. We're not going to take one till we actually get Shaktikanta Das on